Welcome back. Now, the consumer credit market in South Africa is fueled predominantly by home loans and vehicle finance, which make up about 90% of the industry. Meanwhile, credit facilities or unsecured credit transactions, mainly the retail space, make up about 10%. Today, we look into the economics of SA's consumer credit market and what it would take to grow it. Joining us with insights on this is Business Day's Mudiwa Gavaza. Mudiwa, always a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Oljano.
I will tell you, from the outside looking in, it can feel like South Africa's credit market saturated. Lots of players, lots of big players, lots of small players. Is that the case?
It's actually a very interesting one. As we said, the big ones are your home loan players, vehicles, and that type of thing. But in that, small 10%, that is still a huge market, because the data that we have is that the credit market in South Africa, you're looking at roughly 2 trillion rand in terms of that pie. So it means that the part that we're talking about around retail credit and that type of thing is roughly 200 or so and below. So that's still a huge market, and there are a number of different players. A lot of them, being some of these providers, the likes of RCS, which is one of the companies that we've recently spoken to. They are a unit of BNP Paribas, and one of their specialities is, trying by all means to help, companies with their efforts in that particular space, because you are thinking about short-term loans, unsecured loans. When you go to, let's say, a clothing retailer, TFG and others, and you have a clothing account, for example, though that's the type of, credit market that we're talking about.
Very interesting, Mudiwa. I always say that one of the most profitable things to sell in South Africa is credit. Everybody's trying to buy some. But what's also very interesting here, I guess, is the fact that this market defies the political environment. It defies the macroeconomic climate. So let's talk about that and as it relates to your conversation with RCS.
Yeah, so there's a lot that's going on in this space, and even though we are in a downturn, economically, the stories of South Africa's economic growth not being where it is, that's a story well told. People understand that. But, credit has always been one of those things that has remained quite resilient, albeit you've got let's call it, conspicuous consumption. There's that piece, but there's also just the piece that it also lends itself to people just needing, credit just as a way to deal and to survive in certain cases. Let's take, for example, a basic case. You've just come out of university, or maybe you're in your first job or something like that. You need to get around, you've got a new job, you need to clothe yourself. All of this stuff is on cash that you don't have. And you see a lot of people getting into the credit market in that way. But now the issue is, how do you get out of the cycle? Because once you're inside, once you've tasted the ability to spend money that you don't have, that's it's a possible trap. And South Africa, fortunately, unfortunately, has become a country known as a country where there's a lot of credit extension, in the market. There's a lot of people that haven't been able to, pay accounts. Anecdotally, I've heard of people that have clothing accounts worth 60,000 rand, for example, and and these are the amounts that it can escalate up to. A lot of people do get in there quite responsibly, and the likes of RCS are then saying, okay, fine, we understand that we've got this market, but how do we actually make sure that we are able to help the industry across the board? One of the more interesting things that they did speak to us about is the fact that how do you create systems that are, I'm going to call it open-ended, because if you have credit from a particular group or a particular store that usually works within that ecosystem. Take TFG, for example. You've got the likes of Roshini, Markhams. You can take your account between those, but how do you create products that work across different groups, whilst at the same time trying to encourage some type of responsible spending.
I mean, the issue of responsible spending is very interesting with you, but what you also noticed, I think what you also mentioned rather is the fact that in South Africa, the lifestyle, the culture lends itself to the issue of being able to, of course, borrow. I want to speak about store cards specifically in the conversation you had with RCS, because of course, we know store cards, we know having a retail account, be it for furniture, be it for clothing, whatever the case may be. But I want to speak then about them coming online. And what that means is that a growth node here, because of course this industry can grow organically by new entrants entering the market and demanding credit. But there's of course people within the market already who could also be a place of potential growth.
So I think very quickly before I answer that directly, it's always great to maybe locate the importance of credit in an economy. The credit extension in an economy sort of shows you the health of a particular economy. As much as we sound the alarm about the use of credit in South Africa, it also does show that South Africa has a buoyant, financial services sector and a good, good amount of savings that can fund, some of that credit extension. In a number of African countries, for example, people participate in what we would like to call under the pillow banking, where you can't. People would rather save money on their own and not put it into banks, and therefore access to credit becomes very expensive, or it's just out of reach. So in the South African context, you've got that layer, so it's a very mature system. But in terms of how do you enable more people to participate in the economy, this is where the likes of RCS are seeing, some of the opportunities. So take, for example, participating online, e-commerce. For a number of years, you had to have one of those very fancy and then over time, that's then moved to debit cards, that type of thing. But now the likes of RCS are saying we can actually take your store card and you'll be able to make a purchase using a store card on an online platform in the same way that you'd use a credit or a debit card on one of those payments platforms. And that's where they see the growth in the credit market, to say this is opening up South African consumers to a market that they typically wouldn't have been in, and for retailers it's likely going to increase the amount of sales and possibly activity in that online space. So for the likes of RCS, they see it as a big place in which they're going to be able to grow their business.
Before I let you go, Mudiwa, we keep hearing of data and how that can also be, a huge contributor to the way industries work and the insights that, of course, may emerge. I imagine that based on South Africa's very mature credit markets, there is lots of data out there. Is this going to also be where, new products, innovation emerges from being able to look at this data and see how consumer behavior is playing out?
It certainly will be, and it already has. We've seen the rise of what some people call alternative lending, where basically you look at people that would typically not be favorably scored by your traditional financial institutions and therefore find it hard to get credit lines from your traditional banks and that type of thing. But you have the alternative lenders, fintechs, and some of these companies, and I think RCS has played in some of that space where the scoring for credit goes beyond some of the typical metrics that are used by the typical system. So you're looking at buying patterns, buying behavior, other data points that can let you know whether or not a person would be able, to pay back the money at the end of the day, because that's where the real risk lies, right? When you extend credit, you are sort of taking a bet on someone's ability to pay that money back plus the interest. And in a lot of scoring systems, you're taking broad swaths of the South African population out. But at least with some of these, you allow, some people that have been left out, to actually now, participate from that point of view. So definitely an important use of data in that respect.
Brilliant, Mudiwa. Always a pleasure having you. And I'll take a Tuesday newsroom crossing and enjoy the Cape. I can see the mountain behind you as well. That was Mudiwa Gavaza, business writer for Business Day.